We will call the House Tax Committee to order. We do have a quorum. Representative Gottwalt moves the minutes of March 15th. Any additions or corrections? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion prevails. The minutes are passed. Okay, I just want to remind everybody today, probably the most important thing of the day is it is 72 degrees and sunny. With that being said, we will get into House File 2337 as amended. And members, I have some folks on the list that signed up yesterday to talk. I said we'd pick up from there, which we will. There's an author's amendment I'd like to go through first just to get it on the bill so we can have the bill in the order that I would like. Then we'll start with amendments. We'll be starting, well, we've got a few folks who want to talk. I talked to the commissioner and let him know that he could talk whenever he wanted to talk for as long as he wanted to talk, and he said that he would be arriving at about 10:30. So at 10:30 we'll break from what we're doing and we'll listen to the commissioner. We'll make a few comments about House File 2337. My intention was to have him kind of help wrap things up so we knew what the bill looked like, but he'd like to make some comments at about 10:30, so that's what we're doing. Representative Linczewski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, we have all of our amendments drafted to something else, as we didn't know you had an author's amendment. So can we amend all ours onto your author's amendment and work that way?
Well, I think what we'll do is we'll put it on, and we should be able to accommodate the amendments to line it up, shouldn't we?
Can all be ours are all drafted incorrectly then.
No, they aren't.
Mr. Michael? What would be the best way to proceed? I want to accommodate what they want to do here.
Most of the amendments are drafted to the delete everything amendment that will not be affected by this. I can't remember whether any of them would. There may be some that might be affected, in which case we'd have to adjust them.
Mr. Michael, would it be easier for you to adjust them, or should we wait with this amendment, or?
Mr. Chair, it really does. It doesn't matter.
Okay. I'll tell you what, Representative Linczewski. Representative Linczewski, I think what we'll do is I'll hold off on my amendment, and so we'll go through. So your amendments will be drafted correctly for the bill, and then we'll come in with this at the end. It has to do with some local government age adjustments. Takes money from St. Paul and gives it to Preston. No.
To the delete all, right?
No, actually, this Person Paymore. Actually, this one does not. This one does not. No, I really don't want to go there. Come to think of it. Okay. Yeah. No. Okay. So what we'll do is, like I said, we've got a few folks that like to make some comments. Then, members, I would like to get into amendments as soon as we can. Okay. Let's do that, just so people kind of know what this amendment does, so we don't have to wonder, what's this thing coming here at the end. Pat Dalton, if you could start, and then Mr. Michael, explain what the members usually have, the 825 amendment does.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I'm only going to talk about the LGA portion of it, which is starting on lines 1.3 to 2.13. And essentially all this does, the only change from what is in the current bill says everyone's going to get what they get in 2012. What this amendment does is it says any city with a population under 5,000 will get the greater of what they got in 2012 or what the formula would give them in 2013. And it costs about $2.4 million of additional LGA over what's in the bill.
And it doesn't affect any up to St. Paul.
Mr. Chair, it will not affect anybody's aid from what's in the bill right now, other than to make some cities get an increase over what's in the bill.
So, Mr. Chair, how much does Preston get on this?
I thought you'd be asking that, Representative Rukavina. Zero. We had a situation where because of the formula, some cities really got hit that the intention was to do that. So you'll see there'll be some runs, and you can look at what they do. I already looked. Preston 0, Caledonia 0 there.
What kind of a chair are you, Mr. Chair?
Not very good. Mr. Michael, what else does it do here? Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Dalton.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, you do actually have a run, the 2013 LR Alt run, ALT run, and it does show current law.
We have it?
I guess it hasn't been, it's been distributed? No. Or it hasn't?
We'll make sure in a short period of time here that
Maybe,
members
is it
have
this one here?
Yeah, some people have it, some people don't.
No, everybody's got it.
Oh, we've got them?
Yeah.
We've got them? Members? Okay. I guess we have them.
And,
So, Ms. Dalton?
Column 2 is current law. Column 3 is what's in the bill prior to this amendment, and that is paid 12 LGA amounts. And then the alternative is what's in column 4.
Okay, and we'll discuss that further when we get to it. Mr. Michael?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, the rest of the amendments, starting on page 2, line 14, in order to provide the funding for the LGA change and then for the internship program, which we'll get into in a minute, it reduces the NOL transfer program, the maximum under that, for fiscal year 13 from the $15 million that was in the amendment to $10 million. And then the third part of the amendment authorizes this new internship program to be administered by the Office of Higher Education for interns in Greater Minnesota, and provides $1.25 million of funding for that for fiscal year 13. This internship program is a paid internship program that any employer that is taxable under Chapter 290, so that would be either under the corporate franchise tax or the individual income tax, can participate in. Students need to be juniors or seniors in a private or public post-secondary institution. The internship has to be related to their major. It's a 12-week period. The employers are required to pay at least a minimum wage for 16 hours per week. And essentially what the program funding provides is that the eligible employer receives a grant equal to 40% of the compensation that they pay to the intern. And of the appropriation, up to 5% of it can be used for the office's administrative expenses. I believe this was Representative Banyan's proposal.
Yes. I was going to mention that we have had a hearing on this. We heard it as a tax credit. This is actually an actual grant on this one. But let's defer questions on this. We will have a full discussion of this. This will be the last amendment that we'll do at about 11:30. Okay. So with that being said, we had a few comments the members wanted to make, and then as soon as we get through the member comments, then we will start taking amendments, and I'd like to start with Representative Rukavina's amendments. Okay, Representative Downey. Oh, life belongs to those that show up. Representative Drazkowski. Representative Carlson. Oh, man, we're going to get going here in a minute. Representative Crawford. Okay. Okay, very good. Representative Rukavina.
Mr. Chair, can I take the 820 first? It's probably a little easier.
Okay.
Mr. Chair and members.
Okay, if a page could pass out the 820 amendment, please.
They were just taking comments.
Well, it's being passed out, Mr. Chair and members. It was heard the other night, property taxes. And in either 89 or 88, it must have been, I don't know when, maybe 90, I don't know. Joel could help me out. We locked in the penalty on late payments of property taxes at an actual rate in law of 10%, which must have been the prime at the time, and I believe no more than 14. And what this amendment does is brings it down to a little over what the current prime rate is right now. And Mr. Chair, I think I showed you some graphs, and I don't know what I did with them, but St. Louis County is projecting, after the first year you miss your property taxes, if you owe $1,000 in property taxes, you don't pay them, 10%, it compounds annually, and by the fifth year out, they're predicting like almost $450 million in tax delinquent property values. So I think this would help at least save a few people from losing their homes or a few businesses from losing their businesses if we go back and reflect the current prime rate. And I know you've had some other ideas about doing it, Mr. Chair, so that's the amendment.
Well, thank you, Representative Rukavina, and maybe Mr. Michael could explain exactly. We know what the rate was in current law, 10% to 14, and of course this was written back in a time when interest rates were much, much higher. And I happen to agree with Representative Rukavina that it seems here that we're somebody that's having trouble, we're just giving them more trouble. And Mr. Michael, what the Rukavina amendment, the way it is, what would they be able to charge for interest on these delinquent property taxes?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, right now the range is between 10 and 14, and I believe it's at 10%. Representative Rukavina's amendment would change it to between 4% and 7%. I'm sorry, I don't know under this what the rate would actually be when it adjusts. So I'm sorry, I can't tell you whether it's going to be 6.5% or 5% or what it would be, but it would be somewhere in that range.
Well, Mr. Michael, with the current condition of interest rates, wouldn't it trend down closer to the 4?
I think it's 3.5, Mr. Chair, no, isn't it?
I just have not looked recently to know what the prime is.
Members, the discussion I've had with Representative Rukavina on this is that at some points what you do is you say a point above prime or 2 points above prime, something like that. But maybe for now, this language, I'm supporting the Rukavina amendment, but we'll open it up for questions. I will go to Representative Downey after we ask is there anyone in the audience that would wish to testify on behalf of or with concerns on the A20 amendment. Okay, Representative Downey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I apologize. I hope I'm not asking a question that's already been answered. Is this for individuals, businesses, both?
Mr. Michael?
Both.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Downey, this applies to anyone who has delinquent property taxes. So it could be a homeowner, it could be a business.
Representative Downey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just I'll wait to hear the full discussion, but I think I'll join the chair in supporting this. We actually talked about this in our small business caucus, conforming the business penalty rate with the individual personal rate. So I think I'd be inclined to support it as well.
Mr. Chair.
And
Mr. Chair, when I talked about this yesterday, you had a better idea, and if the intent was in the late 80s or 90s when this happened to tie it to reflect a little bit above the prime rate, maybe we can get some language in the final bill that kind of lets it float because, right now you can obviously see the problem when you put it in a number in law.
I agree, and I think for today, I was thinking more of a floating rate because what the prime is what the prime is, and that's probably fair for the day that you're looking at rather than putting actual numbers in statute, because if we would have wild increases of interest rates, then this may actually be too low. But rather than do that on the fly, I would support this amendment now as is and for further discussion, just so we know that there's going to be further discussion if it passes. Representative Downey, were you finished? Representative Bloom?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a question, and perhaps Mr. Michael or to the author of the amendment. Does this apply to all counties, so the policy is uniform with regards to what counties can charge on the interest rate, or is it?
Mr. Michael?
Mr. Chair, Representative Bloom, yes, this is the general law that applies to all delinquent property taxes.
Okay. Well, thank you. And I too, would like to express my support. I remember a couple of years ago when the economy had just started going south really quickly. One of the calls I got for constituent service was a widow lady, and she had flown to Chicago to help her daughter and son-in-law, who I think had both lost their jobs and financial trouble, and she'd forgotten to pay her property taxes before she left. It was gone for a couple of months, had never been late ever in, I don't know how many years she'd owned her house. And I tried to contact the county to say this is, extreme circumstance, and they just weren't willing to deviate from policy. So, I think that doesn't really get to the heart of this, other than the fact that the interest rates are a little exorbitant, and I think this is a good amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Loon. Further discussion? And again, members, this is statewide, and Representative Rukavina had a chart that we looked at this morning showing that St. Louis County alone, in a few
I found them, actually.
is projected to have over $400 million of delinquent property. So this is a real issue, and if this amendment could help some folks get their property taxes paid, that would be a good thing. Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, Representative Rukavina moves the 820 amendment. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion prevailed. Okay, item next, Representative Rukavina.
Chair, this one may have a few more questions, but Representative Downey told me yesterday that I've done so much for Edina that he wants to build a statue in Edina for me, and I told him it could be life-size and it wouldn't cost that much money, even if it was in bronze, but it should maybe be in steel or something. But anyway, members, this amendment, let me explain it to you. In this amendment is what Representative Moline had last year for a lot of the language for copper nickel mining, if it ever happens, to tie the distribution to exactly what is currently in taconite tax distributions. So to the schools, the cities, homestead credit, to IRRB, that kind of thing. So because in current law we don't really have a mechanism for doing that. So that's what most of the amendment would do. But there is also an escalator in the taconite tax laws. Last year, I think Mr. Michaels can back me up on this, the tax escalated about 4 cents a ton. And this year it will do about the same, so it will go from $2.38 to $2.46 a ton. And what this does, by default, then that money would go to the IRRB. And what this bill is directing is that a little bit of the money, say with the local cities and schools that are affected by the effects of mining, the blasting and that type of thing. It would put a nickel into the mining effects distribution with cities and towns around the mines, and the 3 cents into a maintenance fund at the schools. Mr. Chair, it has no general fund implications. It's no increase. The increase has already happened. It just directs that 8 cents a nickel to the cities and 3 cents to the schools, and then there's the copper nickel that just ties it to the current taconite tax distribution. Okay. And I'd appreciate your support, Mr. Chair.
We will open up for questions here in a second. First of all, though, I think I would be remiss if I did not thank Representative Hortman for the getting up extra early this morning to make all those wonderful donuts and rolls. That was very kind. And members, we have some coffee in the back. Representative Hortman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just think we can disagree without being disagreeable, and I hope the donuts help with that.
The donuts are very sweet. Okay, with that, they are so good and so good for you. Okay. Let's see on the A21 amendment, is there anyone in the audience that would wish to testify on behalf of supporting or with concerns about the amendment? And we're very fortunate. I see Commissioner Franz is with us here. After this amendment, we will let the Commissioner address the Tax Committee. Anyone to testify for or against? I think Representative Rukavina has explained the 821 amendment. Questions for members? Representative Downey?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm wondering if staff could clarify a few things for me. I still don't totally understand how all of these OR taxes work, and I know we heard this in K-12 finance, and I kind of deferred on these questions until now. And I think the presentation of this as a different distribution among school districts and I guess if the region up there wants to distribute it that way, I wouldn't have a huge problem with that. However, there's a number of lines in here that make it look to me like we're actually increasing the taxes, and while that may not come through the general fund, it would still be a tax increase. And so I'm curious if staff could maybe walk through the major provisions. I just quickly circled a few. Line 2.7, it looks like we're increasing the tax. Line 4.7 and 4.27, it looks like we might be, although perhaps that's just the way we're distributing it. And then I could probably find a couple of others. I remember there were 4 or 5, so I don't know if we need a huge rundown on every provision, but maybe those 3 that I just mentioned, if Mr. Michael could explain whether these are actually increasing the tax rate or just moving things around.
Mr. Michael?
Mr. Chair, Representative Downey, what this does is the amendment does not increase taxes, but it has 2 effects. I mean, first of all, there are 2 parts. There are really 2 parts to the amendment. The first part of it deals with the tax that will apply to mining of non-ferrous minerals, which is not occurring now. And what it does there is it reduces by 1 percentage point the occupation tax, which is the tax that would be paid to the state general fund, and increases the net proceeds tax that would be paid to the local units of government. And those changes appear on page 1, line 1.3, where you see the reduction in the state occupation tax from 2.45 to 1.45. That's the state tax on these non-ferrous minerals. And then if you look on page 2, line 7, where the tax goes from 2% to 3%, that's an offsetting amount. So the actual mining companies are not going to pay any more or less tax because the tax bases for these 2 taxes are nearly identical. It's just that the local share would increase a bit and the state share would decrease a bit. And I think Representative Rukavina can justify that for you, but he's trying to align it more with the shares of business taxes that are currently paid to the state versus local governments, particularly based on the fact that this bill phases out the state property tax on businesses. So that's one policy question that the bill addresses. The second thing that it does is it changes the allocation of those monies that are generated if this mining ever starts for non-ferrous to the cities, counties, and schools and so forth to more closely mirror the way they distribute the taconite tax. So that's the second thing the amendment does. The third thing it does is it reallocates the way the taconite tax is allocated among schools and cities up on the range. Again, it does not increase taxes in any way, but as Representative Rukavina indicated, there is built-in law an escalator that's caused the rate of that tax to go up last year and will again go up this year by somewhere between 8 and 9 cents per ton. And so it's allocating that additional money. Well, let me back up and say normally that would then go under the residual to these 2 IRRB funds. And instead what Representative Rukavina is doing, he's saying that money instead will go to the cities where the mines and the plants are, or to the schools under this other program, as opposed to these IRRB funds. But there are no tax increases on the industry in this. It's just sort of distributing where the money goes.
Representative Downey?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Michael. So that first component where we're moving money from the state general fund up to the Iron Range may mean, Representative Rukavina, that I can't build a full-size statue. It may have to be a bobblehead in my community for you. So,
Mr. Chair.
Representative Anderson. And then Biskin. Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess I'm looking at lines 4.13 through 4.19. I was wondering, Representative Rukavina, why you wanted to strike language that requires them to use half of the money for infrastructure improvement projects. Can you give me a little idea why you're striking that language?
Rukavina.
Mr. Chair, Senator Janicic put that in back, I don't know when we created this fund, and it's been nothing but a pain really for, another municipality to ask another. Right now it's 4 cents, and they have to go and find somebody else and say, let's do a cooperative project. And then the IRRB, of which I don't think ever should have been involved in local government to tell them what to do, is supposed to look at it. And it's really not even happening. I mean, yeah, people call up, say, let's spend the money here and there, but it's nothing but a pain. And it's like, who tells, with local property taxes, Preston, they got to cooperate with La Crescent to spend a little bit of their local property tax. So if you don't like it, I'll leave it in, but it's kind of archaic, I think.
Representative Anderson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think what gives me most cause for concern is removing the requirement that half of the funds be used for infrastructure improvement projects. I think I'm concerned if it's just a blank deal. I'm not quite sure what they would spend the money on other than that. Can you give me a little background of what are some of the projects that have been funded with these dollars? If you can give me a little background on that, I think that would be helpful.
Representative Rukavina.
Well, Mr. Chair, Representative Anderson, I think half the money the city itself just determines they're going to, pay their workforce or have put it in the ice arena or fix a street or a sewer or whatever. But the problem is that right now under current law, then they're supposed to, the other half, like Virginia is supposed to go to Mountain Iron and say, well, let's do a local project together, and nobody else, any other community or municipality that I know of is told by the state that they have to go next door and cooperate with another city to spend their own local property tax. So, but if there's a problem with it, Mr. Chair, I don't want to prolong this. I'll remove it and leave the language in there, but that was my reasoning behind it.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Representative Rukavina. It does give me a little heartburn on that piece. I did have one more question, and that was for probably Mr. Michael. Who does monitor this, how these funds are being used, and, who checks up on this? Whose responsibility is that? Do you know?
Mr. Michael.
State auditor.
Mr. Chair, Representative Anderson, these monies are just like any other money that a local government receives. So, I mean, in some ways, it's analogous to either the property tax that a city would receive or the LGA that a city would receive. So, really, the only check on that is the local voters and the state auditor. Obviously, they're required to report their financials and so forth to the public, but this is just essentially, unless there are specific restrictions on how it must be spent, this is essentially just general purpose aid typically that goes to these cities and counties and schools.
Representative Anderson.
That's it. Thank you, Mr.
Representative Bisgins. Then we're going to go to the committee. Well, I guess we'll finish this amendment and then go to Commissioner Franz. Representative Bisgins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First question is to Mr. Michaels. Mr. Michaels, it's my understanding that the occupation tax typically right now comes to the state, but there's a specific distribution of that occupation tax, 50% to the general fund, 40% to K-12 schools, and 10% to the University of Minnesota. Am I correct on that?
Mr. Michael.
Based on my memory, yes, I believe that's the allocation of the, and of course those monies can substitute, since the general fund supports most of those things, right? It sort of gets into that mix. Yes, correct.
Representative Biskin.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and to members of this committee. Then I will point out the only logical analysis is if we're going to reduce the money, and I'm all for reducing it to the general fund, but we had a big discussion yesterday about reducing to K-12. If you're going to reduce the money to K-12, and then you notice that we're increasing money on page 5 to 4 different school districts, the net effect is less money for your schools, more money for 4 schools up in the Iron Range. Am I wrong in that, Representative Rukavina?
Mr. Chair, yeah, you are incorrect on that, because the taconite monies don't have anything to do with that first part with the copper nickel mining. The taconite production tax and the occupation tax for taconite is already locked in law at a specific rate, and I don't know what that actual rate is, but so the 5 cents and 3 cents have absolutely nothing to do with the general fund and no effect on it whatsoever. On the other hand, on the copper nickel mining, if it ever happens, and I hope you and I aren't, in the nursing home in the pens or something, but anyway, when it does happen, yeah, yeah, and we'll be costing the general fund money, I might add, but it does lower the occupation tax, which is in the Constitution as the corporate income tax on ores, which was a higher rate at one time than any other corporation would pay. And I think it was adjusted for taconite and iron ores to reflect currently what a corporation would pay. But it never was adjusted for copper nickel, because even though that's been in law for a long time, there's never been a copper nickel mine, and I don't know when it's going to happen. What I was trying to do with this, as Mr. Michael said, is reflect currently what the break is between all the corporate taxes collected for property taxes versus the corporate taxes, corporate income tax. And that's what I was trying to do with those numbers. But I'll tell you what, I don't want to argue about this and screw up this bill. If you want to go back to the current numbers, go back to them. But last year in the tax bill, the chair did adjust those numbers for us. So if the chair wants to look at them and adjust them, if it's going to cause some consternation here, that's fine with me. But I was only trying to do exactly what kind of is in current law versus corporate income taxes paid to the state versus the statewide corporate property taxes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And the reduction of the tax on page 1, I don't think is specific to copper and nickel.
Yes, it is, Mr. Chair. It is. It is, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Michael, can you clarify that part, please?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, that there are 2 occupation taxes. There's the occupation tax that applies to taconite, which is in a different section of the law, and that would be unaffected by this. This only applies, and that is at the 2.45% rate. This would only affect the non-ferrous ores that are mined, and so it'll depend whether this has an effect, as Representative Rukavina says. It will depend upon when that mining begins to occur and those taxes begin to be paid.
Thank you.
Okay, what we're going to do, since there are some more questions here on this issue, is I apologize to Commissioner Franz. You know that I'm always on time. I said 10:30. Commissioner, if you could come down and join us. We're going to just lay this over temporarily to hear from our Commissioner of Revenue, and then we'll go back, and I have run back and Kmart have questions on the E21 amendment, so we'll temporarily lay the 2-1 amendment over. Commissioner, I apologize for the delay. We're very fortunate to have you with us today to make some comments on House File 3337. As former Majority Leader Valenti used to say, the situation's fluid. So you might be commenting on a moving target here, but we have some broad parameters of where we're headed here. So welcome to the Tax Committee, Commissioner, and if you could provide some testimony on House File 2337 as you see it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Myron Franz, Revenue Commissioner for the record. I am particularly pleased to be here on a day that Representative Hortman has brought treats. That's always a nice way to start the day. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing me the opportunity. I know you folks are in the middle of working very hard, and I don't want to take too much of your time so you can finish your work and finish this bill, as there is a lot to do, and things are moving rather rapidly. So I appreciate the opportunity to just briefly make some comments about some priorities and concerns so that we're on the same page as we go forward. As you know, we talked about this the last time that I was here. The governor's really asked that we focus on creating jobs and do it in a way that's paid for and in a balanced, fiscally responsible way. So with that in mind, one of the things that we talked about the last time that I was here was the copy of the handouts that you're getting right now, and that is the concern that we have about jobs. The recovery is occurring, and we're doing better than a lot of states, but nonetheless, there are still 168,000 Minnesotans who need work, and the governor wants us to try to come together, taking your best ideas and our best ideas and creating a package that actually increases jobs. We all know that the veterans in particular are suffering under this stress of this economic recovery, and in fact, the Red Bull unit that will be returning in May, the estimated unemployment rate for that group now is almost 20%. So we also have about 130,000 Minnesotans who are receiving unemployment insurance at this time. We know that there are a lot of students out there who are facing very, very stiff competition. I don't think any of us ever faced this kind of competition as students after graduating from high school or college or a certificate program. So as we work through together, we work through trying to create opportunities for job creation. I just wanted to mention a few things. As the charts show, and we discussed the last time that I was here, when the jobs go down, the revenue goes down. The income tax revenue goes down, the sales tax revenue goes down, and obviously the corporate income tax revenue go down. And so our concern is trying to figure out ways that as this recovery is taking place, that we can really make sure that whatever we do is focused on the creation of jobs. And that's why the governor's jobs credit program, which hasn't made it here yet, but was focused on really requiring that a job be created for a tax credit. One of the things that the Jobs Now credit requires is that the employer hire either an unemployed veteran, an unemployed Minnesotan, or a recent graduate before the end of this year to get a $3,000 credit, and before the end of June 30, 2013 to get a $1,500 credit in 2013. The idea being trying to focus on jobs that are created now, right away, and that it's targeted in a way that requires that the employment lasts for at least a year. Now, the other thing that I want to talk about briefly about your omnibus bill before this committee is focusing on how best to use the revenue dollars to make sure that we create jobs. One of the things that we are focused on in creating jobs is, as I mentioned earlier, the requirement that an actual job be created by the employer. And one of the concerns that we have about some of the relief provisions in the omnibus bill is there's no actual requirement that there be any job hire or a job creation. The phase out of the business property tax, the conversion of the FOC deduction, the expansion of the second-tier R&D credit, and the technology corporate franchise tax certificate transfer program, I think I said that right, are not directly tied to the creation of a job. So we're committed to trying to propose a balanced approach so that any tax relief or any tax credit is really directly tied to creating a job. The other component that we're really concerned about is fiscal responsibility. We all know the situation that we're in and that we're facing a structural deficit of $1.1 billion in fiscal year 2014 and 2015. And that is one of the governor's concerns with the current bill is the fact that it's not funded and it would add to the deficit in 2014 and 2015. The other real concern that we have about the phase out of the business property tax is the fact that it's targeted and not balanced. We would much rather see a balanced approach to tax relief that provides property tax relief for all taxpayers, not just business property taxpayers, but homeowners and apartment owners, and also in addition to business tax owners. So our concern is that the approach doesn't really provide relief for everyone, and it in fact takes some of that relief and it uses part of that relief is paid for by reducing the renter's credit from 17% to 15%. The governor's concerned that by lowering that percentage, Along with some of the other changes in the bill, it would reduce the refunds to over 300,000 people by an average of $213, and would make about 67,000 renters ineligible for the refund in fiscal year 2013. As you all know, the renter's refund credit is one of the more progressive components of the income of the tax system in Minnesota, and we believe cuts to this program would hurt low and moderate income Minnesotans. So our concern and our hope is that we can work together to find a balanced approach that provides tax relief for all classes of property, not favoring one over the other, but that we can pay for it and it doesn't increase any budget deficits. Just two more items, and then be glad to open it up for questions and let you return to your work. We noticed the inclusion of a tax reform commission in the study, and first of all, we all agree, I think, that tax reform is an effort that is long overdue, and we need to make a serious effort in trying to make the system more fair, more simple, and promote economic growth. And that is what the governor has tasked me to do over this next year. And I've been working closely with Chair Davids. We've discussed this issue. And one of the things that we've tried to do whenever we go out and listen to Minnesotans is always invite the local legislators. I've had about 35 meetings in 18 different cities with over 50 different legislators and over 2,000 Minnesotans. And I think that collaboration and that working together is really critical and that we need to have going forward. We all know that serious tax reform is going to require the governor's effort, my effort, your effort, the legislative effort, both on a bipartisan basis, and also the advice and consultation of experts and citizens. And through that mechanism, we believe we can come to an approach that would provide an opportunity to provide this body with a tax proposal, a serious tax reform proposal for the legislative session in 2013. We are concerned about adding another commission and another report. We are reviewing all the previous commissions. There's a stack of commissions on my desk that's literally this high of reports and studies that have been done, and we're reviewing all those. But our concern is this is 2013 or 2012 is going to be a very busy year, and we already have a lot on our plate. And I think by working together in the way we're working now with the collaboration, we can accomplish what the commission would set out to do. Finally, I just want to mention that there have been some increased activity levels, some reports and studies in the bill that we'll have to talk about at some point to make sure that we deal with any increased costs that might occur to the Department of Revenue. And as we work through this bill together, our office is here studying it and trying to be prepared to answer any technical questions. But as Governor Dayton stated in his State of the State, we want to take your good ideas, our good ideas, and come together with a way to help promote jobs in a way that's balanced and also is paid for. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Mr. Chair, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Questions for the Commissioner? Representative Gottwald?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Commissioner France, appreciate you being here and sharing this with us. I'm glad to hear the Dayton administration on record about wanting to cut taxes across the board. That's a good thing to hear. I'm a little curious, though. You talked about across the board tax cuts and that we don't just want to cut property taxes for corporations, but others, and about the deficit that's coming up. I think the point here, and I'd like to hear you comment on it, is that not all tax relief is created equal. A tax relief for a corporation can result in additional jobs, additional investment in business infrastructure. We're talking about permanent job creation here within our economy that then, of course, generates additional tax revenue, allows people to get off of public programs and do for themselves more. There are a whole lot of positive fiscal impacts of that kind of tax relief. Now, we don't score that dynamically here in the state, as was testified to yesterday. But I'd like to hear you comment on that. I mean, I think that's the whole goal of this. It isn't that we don't want to provide tax relief for all. It's that right now tax relief in this area could help us grow jobs, grow our economy, help get us back on track so that 1.1 becomes less and less and less, and maybe we get it out of the way by next biennium.
Commissioner Franz?
Mr. Chair, Representative, well, thank you for the question. I think one of the things that we've been hearing, to back up a little bit, Representative, in the area of corporate tax reform, for example, is a real concern that we level the playing field. We continue to hear that, in fact, some corporations or businesses are quite upfront about we'd happily give up our deduction or our credit or whatever it might be in the interest of broadening the corporate tax base in a way that makes it more fair and everyone pays the same rate. So this idea of fairness and leveling the playing field is quite important for a lot of corporations. And to the extent, any good tax reform analysis, and this was done in 1986 in the Reagan tax reform, the 1986 Tax Reform Act, where there were a lot of concerns about the fact that the playing field wasn't level, and there were too many winners and losers in the system. And by eliminating some of those preferences and by being able to broaden the corporate tax base, they were able to lower the corporate tax rate in that situation. And so that is one of the typical trade-offs you see in any broad-based tax reform, is where you're able to level the playing field, increase a broader-based tax base, and then lowering the rate or doing something else with the revenue. But I think the other point that we're hearing from corporations is that there are more components than just the actual tax rate or the taxes that they pay that they tell us that they see in going forward. And part of that is making sure that the state is investing in education and infrastructure and health care, because they want to make sure they need a really talented, available workforce, and they want the workforce to be able to be trained appropriately, smart, talented. They want the workforce to be able to have health care and access to jobs. So it is the goal of making the Minnesota economy more attractive is a multifaceted issue and not just focus on the tax rate. So we see the opportunity to talk about tax reform in a global sense, an important ingredient for corporations to look at Minnesota and say those folks have really done a good job in making the playing field level, where we all can participate on the same basis, and that their budget is balanced and they're appropriately investing in infrastructure. So it is a big issue, and it's one I think we need to address.
Congressman Gavel.
Just a quick follow-up, Mr. Chair. Well, Commissioner France, I appreciate that. You kind of went away from my question to the broader issue of broad-based tax reform, and I think most corporations would agree, to do it kind of across the board would be a great thing. There's been a lot of criticism in the past of things like Job Z that kind of pick winners and losers, and how we really need to make Minnesota, border to border, a much more competitive state for corporations to stay and grow. But I talk with companies regularly, and they agree with the investment in education and so forth, and they feel they are doing that. But I think the question I was asking is, this bill proposes to emphasize relief to corporations so we can get some immediate, boost in the economic impact, the payback to the state through tax revenues, through helping people get off of dependency on government programs, and all the positive aspects of that, both to individuals as well as to our state revenues. So with regard to this particular proposal, don't you see there's a bit of a difference in where we put our tax relief right now for the purposes of boosting our state economy? And then we can talk, I agree with you, I mean, there needs to be a much broader discussion about what we do with property tax relief and other tax relief. But if you could speak to that specifically.
Commissioner France.
Mr. Chair, Representative. Well, I think that goes really to the concerns I laid out a little bit earlier, and I think the key is, for the current situation, for this current biennium, the governor is really committed to not borrowing any more, or to not creating any more outlying deficits in the next biennium. And so the concern is that if we're going to engage in any kind of tax relief now, it needs to be fully paid for and not enhance any deficits, and it needs to be balanced. I mean, the governor's approach is that, sure, property tax relief for corporations can help, but in this situation, a lot of folks need property tax relief. And so the governor's preference is to have a broad-based, balanced approach to any tax relief that's paid for and doesn't create any deficits.
Congressman Gavel.
Well, I'll just finish up here, Mr. Chair. It is very clear, especially when you talk to the job creators in this state, that such relief can spur job growth, will spur job growth, will add to state revenues in a way that the so-called broad-based property tax relief would not. If you take the same dollars and focus it in that area, you're going to realize some real gains on our economy, which is what we really want to do. This is about growing jobs, and businesses create jobs. Taking that same dollar and spreading it across all types of property taxes has a diluting effect on the impact to our economy, and that's why I think this bill emphasizes that. So I guess I would disagree with that philosophy from the Dayton administration, but I appreciate your comments. Thanks.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Commissioner France, thanks for coming today to talk to us a little bit about this. A couple of things that I just wanted to raise with you is, first of all, maybe you haven't had a chance to kind of look through this bill, but we not only provide property tax relief to business community, but also to homeowners by increasing the property tax refund and changing that around. So I don't know if you've had a chance to look at that, but this does include property tax relief for businesses and homeowners across the state of Minnesota. But the one thing that I wanted to comment on was your comment on the multifaceted approach to having a good environment for businesses, that it doesn't just include our tax structure, but it also includes other things as well. And what I've seen so far from the governor's office is an unwillingness to help foster that, especially when we have sent him bill after bill that would make our regulatory environment less onerous for our businesses and take away some of the bureaucratic red tape that quite honestly slows down economic growth within this state. And if you can send the message to him that it is a multifaceted approach and that it's not just about tax structure, but it's also about the regulations that we have in this state, and that we need to address some of those issues. And when you have 67,000 businesses saying, hey, you need to make this change because it sure would make it a lot easier for us to operate within the state and create jobs, and I think that would be helpful. So if you can send that message to him and share your own philosophy on this, I think that would be helpful.
Representative France. Commissioner France, sorry.
I just got promoted. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, Representative. Well, on the just a quick issue about the homeowners, I have had a chance to look at some of the bill components, not all of them. As you said, they're moving parts. Our concern would be that the homeowners relief is fairly small in comparison to the business statewide credit, and also leaves out apartment owners. And just the concern is that everyone needs a little tax relief, not just some folks. But in terms of the regulation, the governor is really concerned about regulations and streamlining government regulations, and that's been an important message that he's had, I know, with the PCA and other agencies. But I will take back your message again. I appreciate your comments.
Anderson. Representative Lesh. I have Lesh, Loon, Paymar, Crawford, Kiffmeyer. Representative Lesh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner France, thank you for the testimony on this. And I'm looking at this and seeing the proposal for, where did Representative Gavel go? He just left, didn't he? Is he around? Okay. Well, maybe he'll come back in by the time. He was afraid. He was looking at me. I'll ask Representative Anderson. But I'm wondering, Representative Anderson, would you agree to tying additional jobs, or tying tax credits to additional jobs, and if they're not produced, that we get the money back?
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Representative Lesh, let me ask you this. Would you agree to tying LGA to lower property taxes?
Okay, let me respond to my question to you, to your question to me with another question. Or would you just go back and forth with questions? Is that deal? Okay. I'm going to take that as a no, and I can't figure out why that's not a deal. I like a good deal, Representative Anderson. I'm sure you like a good deal, and I'm not sure why you wouldn't want a good deal for the citizens of Minnesota to say, hey, if we're going to give you money, why not produce the jobs? And if you don't give us the jobs, because that's the deal, then we get our money back. That's just a square deal for Minnesota taxpayers. And if that's not happening, Minnesota taxpayers should look at their legislature and say, what's going on? And we'll say, oh, well, they promised us they were going to produce those jobs. I remember after all these tax cuts 10 years ago, most of which went to top income earners and as you said, the job creators. And then I remember the next 5 years of then Governor Tim Pawlenty complaining about how we were bleeding manufacturing jobs and our economy was stagnant and nothing was happening. I can't figure out, well, what happened to that deal? Did we get a raw deal? And if that's the case, why didn't we ask for our money back? And there's the constant mantra of, well, it'd be even worse if we didn't give him that. It's akin to the Stockholm syndrome, battered wife syndrome. Well, you made us do it. You guys made us do that. And if you don't keep giving us these tax breaks, well, it's going to be even worse for you, which is patently ridiculous. I mean, come on, people. We need to make sure. And you look at these tax cuts to job creators who aren't creating jobs, and thank God for the small businesses that are creating the jobs. There shouldn't be any reason with targeting these tax cuts to the people where the money stays in the economy. If you give the money to people who send it out of state or support their offices in Barbados or wherever, well, you're not supporting the local economy. If you make sure that homeowners get these tax breaks, if you make sure that working people get these tax breaks, it circulates back in the economy and creates these jobs. Tax cuts you look at as well, it's going to fuel the economy. And I think about this. My buddy in high school had a 1979 Dodge Diplomat. It was a horrible car, but it was the only car any of us had. And so we all had to pile into the Dodge Diplomat and tool around and go over it. And you pull up at a stoplight, and my buddy, his name is Hessling, he's a priest now, in fact, he'd rev the engine, and he'd gun the engine, which was funny because the Dodge Diplomat wasn't going anywhere. But he'd rev the engine. And he threatened to one time, we were going to drive down to the airport and get some airplane fuel for that thing. And you fill it up with like 105 octane airplane fuel or something. And that was going to take care of it. Just putting that high octane gas in that car was going to make it go. Well, he did that, and we still got the doors blown off us by a Toyota. It wasn't funny at all. Because the high octane gas is just one component of turning the economy around. You need to make sure that all the other, you got to have the good tires, you got to have a decent engine, you got to make sure it's tuned up, all these other things. The tax cuts targeted to top tier corporations are not going to circulate the money in the economy where it needs to go. And the commissioner's argument that, well, you know what, if this hasn't been working recently, we should learn from our mistakes and simply tie the money that we're given to job creators to the fact that they create the jobs. That's a fair deal. I don't understand why it shouldn't be the case.
Any members have any questions for Commissioner Franz?
Mr. Chair.
Representative Anderson.
If I could respond, I think I have a bipartisan agreement that Representative Lesh and I can both sign on to. I tell you what, I am going to do an amendment to the bonding bill that we tie jobs to every dollar that's spent on the bonding bill, that they have to produce the jobs that are purported by the governor. Would you be willing to sign on to that with me?
That sounds like a yes, that you agree to what we're talking about today.
I'm asking you, Representative Lesh, you going to sign on to that amendment with me?
I think we got something good going here, Mr. Chair. I think the bill that we're talking about today with the commissioner here, we're making some progress with Representative Anderson, and I have great hope for America now in the state of Minnesota.
God bless America. Representative Loon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And actually, I do have questions for the commissioner, so thanks. And I do appreciate the commissioner being here. And we had a nice opportunity last fall to sit next to each other at a dinner and talk about tax reform and that. And I appreciated that conversation. And just a couple of things in listening to the discussion and your testimony today, you know, kind of the whole notion of fairness and the tax system and that. You know, yes, and that's an important factor. And when we look at our tax system, what I struggle with so much on the statewide property tax is that I don't see the relationship between that specific tax and business profitability or just the purpose of property taxes. Because, again, those same businesses are paying their local property taxes to the local jurisdiction, but yet this statewide tax doesn't have a relationship to those local services. individual homeowners don't pay a statewide property tax other than, cabin owners do. But, so, from a fairness standpoint, and it's not keyed into profitability at all. You could be a failing business that's underwater and you still pay the statewide property tax. So I guess I just don't understand if we're clinging to that as somehow a tax fairness item, where the fairness comes from that. And then other question, and you've talked about a couple of things. One was the R&D tax credit and whether or not that, has a direct correlation to job creation or not. And we could talk about that a little further, but I do recall that the governor did include R&D tax credit in his budget last year, and I do think it's something, if we want to encourage high-tech companies, which have a lot of very expensive research and development costs, and we want, generally those tend to be companies that have job requirements of people with advanced degrees, and they tend to be better paying jobs for that type of work. I would think that would be something we would want to encourage in doing, and it seems that the governor was sort of leading down that path as well with his budget last year, so I wanted to ask you about that. And then thirdly, you've talked about kind of reforming our system, and I am wholeheartedly on board with that. We need to, in my opinion, really sort out our tax structure. I don't think it works well for a lot of reasons, but if you could talk a little bit about kind of where the governor's at on that. I've heard your comments on it, but the common theme I hear from the governor over and over is this: he just plans to raise taxes on the rich, and we can debate about how you define that, and we don't have to get into that right now. But, I mean, is he similarly situated on the comments you've shared about the whole system, or is he? It just seems to me he's continually focused on that one issue, and I'd like to hear any comments you would have on that. So, thank you.
Commissioner?
Mr. Chair, thank you, Representative. First of all, for the record, I had a 1957 Chevrolet, Representative, and it couldn't beat anything. No, I appreciate your questions and your comments, because I think in terms of the business property tax and the direct tie about fairness and the direct tie to value and income, clearly it's not tied to income for business properties. And when the state levy, the trade-off that was made in 2001, when the changes were made for the class rate compression, that was part of what the businesses wanted, was to change the class rate so that they had a much more compressed class rate, and that class rate turned out to be quite a benefit for them. And one of the trade-offs was to get them out of the K-12 funding mechanism and then have a statewide property tax, and also have this annual inflation accelerator. So, I mean, that was a deal that was reached a number of years ago, and I think clearly in the context of overall reform, tax reform, property tax reform in particular, we need to look at whether those paradigms still make sense, and how they make sense going forward. How should they be tied together? I mean, one of the concerns in property tax, as you know, the property tax of the three different sources of revenue, the three primary sources of revenue, income tax, sales tax, and property tax, the property tax component of that revenue is now about almost 40% instead of 33%, which is typically what we look at for all different sources of revenue. So it is an issue I think we do need to address. With respect to the R&D issue, the governor did include an increase or enhanced R&D last year for both levels. I think one of the concerns, a couple concerns that we had in this current bill, and that was that the increase was only for the top level of R&D, and we would prefer that any increase in R&D would be able to be used by the smaller companies, the startup companies, and then obviously you have the concern about how do you pay for that if you do that in this particular situation. And last of all, in terms of talking about tax reform, the governor is clearly committed to looking at comprehensive tax reform, and at the same time he's made it clear that part of his view of what fairness means is that the progressivity of the tax system needs to increase, and through his particular view, that would be an increase on the upper tier, the top 2% or the upper income earners. So that's his perspective. He ran on that. He was elected on that, and that's his concern. But he also wants to take a look at how can we implement or look at that design, that issue, in the context of global tax reform that affects everyone. So he is clearly committed, and checks in on a regular basis about what we're hearing from Minnesotans and legislators and experts about tax reform and what are the important issues. So he's pushing that tax reform vehicle very hard, but that is one of his issues, is progressivity.
Representative Bloom.
Thank you, Commissioner. And just one other quick question and follow up on sort of the initiative that he's put forward on the tax credit directly tied to job creation. And this is something we talked about in this committee probably 2 or 3 years ago at the really peak of the recession when things were really going downhill, and some other states were initiating this. And I think actually it was Commissioner Einestein before the committee, and I'd asked him about that. And one of the concerns that was raised was administrative problems with that, and how you track it and how you ensure that it's working. And so I would just be interested in any comments you might have on that.
Commissioner France.
Mr. Chair, Representative, well, the R&D credit is a wonderful credit in the sense that it does focus primarily on jobs in Minnesota, because most of the credit is used towards employment in Minnesota for R&D activity. So that's a good thing, and it's a requirement that we like to see. We like to see that encouragement of Minnesota R&D activity in the state. It is an administrative problem, because the definition of R&D does require some analysis, and the federal government has an R&D credit. So it is something that we have to work on, and we do have to examine with taxpayers. It's something that needs some work, and that's one of those real difficult trade-offs, because here's an opportunity to foster, promote R&D activity with more jobs in Minnesota, but then how do you do it in a way that everyone understands this qualifies as R&D and this does not? And it's something that's changing, and it is an enforcement and an administrative issue.
Mr. Chair, if I could, and I'm sorry if I misspoke and threw R&D into that question, because that wasn't what I was getting at. It was the specific initiative that the governor's outlined, specific jobs credit, the credit for jobs created. And again, this was something a few other states had tried probably back in 2009 or so. And again, this is something that we had debated in this committee a little bit back and forth with the previous administration. That was one of the concerns that was raised. How do you track that and know for sure that the credit's being appropriately used? And again, the comments at that time was that it was just really hard to do successfully or accurately.
Commissioner?
Mr. Chair, Representative, I'm sorry I misunderstood your question. I think one of the things we've tried to do, and it's a challenge for any credit, because you want to make the credit as easily understandable as possible, and I looked at it from the point of view of a small business person. If I could read the paper and read about this potential credit that was enacted, would I understand what I needed to do in order to qualify for the credit? Was it simple? Was it direct? And so then you turn around, okay, then once you do that, and that's why we tried to make it really clear you had to hire the new person in 2012 for $3,000 or by June 30th in 2013 for $1,300 or $1,500. And the key that we came up with a system so that we would have an electronic application so that a company could make a reservation and say, I'm making the hire, I qualify for the credit, but they can only claim the credit on the return after the person has worked for a year. And so we would use that mechanism to follow and require that be followed up. So it does have some administrative issues, but we've seen some of the other states, and what we've tried to do is design a system that's as simple as possible, will require the least amount of administrative review as possible.
Representative Loon?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Commissioner.
Representative Paymar, Crawford, and Kiffmeyer. Representative Paymar?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner, I think you've heard loud and clear from this side of the aisle that the CI tax should be phased out, and in the beginning of your comments you raised a concern about where the revenue was coming from to phase out the CI tax. So can you tell me again, for this side of the aisle that supports taking money from disabled seniors and low-income people to phase out the CI tax, what's wrong with that?
Commissioner France?
Mr. Chair, Representative, well, from a fiscally a fiscal point of view, it's approximately $800 million that comes out of the budget for the statewide property tax credit. And so to phase that out without having a mechanism to pay for it is simply something we're going to have to be concerned about, because right now there's no mechanism to backstop that revenue, to figure out where it comes from. So our concern has continually been not engaging in piecemeal relief activity that targets only certain properties and it's not paid for in the out years. So we're concerned that it's not paid for in the out years, and we're taking some of the money from those who can least afford to have their tax refunds lowered. So that's the concern that the administration has.
Representative Paymark?
That's enough, thanks.
Representative Crawford, then Kissmeyer, then I'd like to get into the amendments again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to the committee. Commissioner Franz, it's always good to see you and talk to you. Last Monday, we had a couple people testify, and I'd like to mention the commercial and industrial property tax again, just for a second. One represented the National Federation of Independent Business. The other was a chamber member, and they, of course, represent corporate interests, and all of a sudden I realized, well, I'm a member of both of those organizations myself. When you're in a small town, you tend to join organizations, whether it's PTA or American Legion. But I assure you, I'm not a big corporate interest. If you looked at my tax return, you'd probably start laughing. But I represent a lot of people that belong to both of those organizations, and I would say that the people I've talked to in Main Street and small towns, they would really appreciate something like this. And so I guess what I'm asking is there just a acknowledgement that this would be a boon to people in small towns in rural Minnesota?
Commissioner Franz?
Mr. Chair and Representative, well, obviously it's an opportunity for those folks who qualify to receive a benefit, and so the concern we have, though, is picking only certain folks to benefit when there are a lot of other folks out there who also need tax relief and property tax relief, are concerned about it. So our concern is just not having a balanced approach and being able to pay for it in a way that doesn't create any deficits.
Jim Crawford.
Thank you. Well, I've been here about a year now, and I've heard a lot of history lessons. Some people go back to Palenti, or I heard somebody Ventura. Yesterday somebody mentioned Quee. I'm actually waiting for somebody to go back to Harold Stassen.
Representative Carlson, would you like to comment?
Just acknowledging that I was the one that said I went back to Quee. And even earlier, I go back to Wendy Anderson. So.
But anyway,
Jim Crawford.
And it's all very interesting, and I understand both parties use it to their own advantage, and it's interesting. But to me, I got here a year ago, and that's when history started, and all the other stuff is all interesting, but not too relevant to me. And so we did whatever we did, and I think we did a good job. Other people have a different opinion. But sometimes we can learn from what other states do. I was reading a newspaper here that said Illinois had the worst job record in 2011. And their unemployment rate went from 9% to 9.8% in December. And over the same period, 46 states improved their unemployment record, and in fact gained jobs. And this article goes on to say, well, what did they do to be an outlier in this? One thing they did was they increased personal income taxes rates 67%, and they increased corporate rates 46%. So in another article, it talks about Illinois, and it says 270,000 people have left Illinois for not the warmer states, but for other states in the Midwest. So is there a correlation there, I guess, is my question? Or is there some other reason that has happened? I know you're probably not an expert on Illinois, or other people aren't either, but does that seem plausible to you?
Commissioner?
Mr. Chair, Representative, well, I do know that the former governor began serving his sentence yesterday. I don't think that has any correlation.
I think, Commissioner, he's become a Denver Bronco fan. Commissioner.
But, you know, it's interesting. In Illinois, I know I'm not an expert on Illinois, but I appreciate your question. And it's interesting to look at these states when things like this happen. And it's hard to sometimes find out what are those migration patterns, what do they mean, and why do they occur. And I can tell you very seriously that I've studied a lot of these migration studies in terms of why people move from one state to another. And I can tell you thus far, I haven't found anything that convinces me that there's any one reason, or you can point to a tax change one way or the other. As we all know, the decision to make a move is a difficult move for a family, and it's based on a lot of factors, the idea to go find a job somewhere else, or the idea of education, and it's just a complex factor. And whether businesses make those changes for economic incentives or whether they make it for tax rates, I've just not been able to find a good study that tells me convincingly what is the reason. It's a multifaceted reason, and but it's something, those are the kinds of things that we do need to look at and see what we can learn.
Representative Crawford?
Thank you.
Okay, we'll wrap up with Representative Kiffmeyer, then we will, I hope you have an appointment at 11 o'clock. Thank you for your time. We'll wrap up with Representative Kiffmeyer, and then Representative Kiffmeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioner. Glad to have you here today and appreciate your taking the time today to be here. Probably one of the things that I've heard from my local units of government in regards to the things that they do, school districts as well, when the state uses up property tax-based capacity in this way, it hinders their ability to use probably about the only tax most of them have consistently, and that is their local property tax. The state has corporate, they have income, they have sales tax, but predominantly in the local units of government and entities like that, for them, their base is almost exclusively the property tax. So since this is a recent tax, actually, in the last 10, 12 years, this has really been something that they feel has really harmed their ability to be competitive, to bring job providers and businesses into their local communities. It hinders them in being able to have the school districts to have that property tax base that they can use. And they also feel that it isn't really based upon an ability to pay, it's just upon you must pay. And so it doesn't have that kind of approach to it. And I think that that is something that I'm really sensitive to. I think that is a very, very valid approach. And so, I've always felt, just on a principle point of view, that the state should stay off of that kind of tax, because that should be more the purview and the ability for the local units of government and the people in those local areas to be competitive nationwide, statewide, within the state. And so I just thought I would mention that, and that's, by the way, I had a 57 Chevy two-barrel carburetor, and I have no clue what that means, except my brothers thought it was cool. But I'm much more interested in that kind of philosophical approach in regards to my support for doing away with this particular kind of tax, property tax.
Commissioner Franz?
Mr. Chair, Representative, well, if you had a floor carburetor, that would have been a lot faster.
Was that it?
Yeah.
Maybe that's what it was.
Yeah, 4-barrel.
Thanks for clarifying.
I'm sorry. Anyway, but you're right, and I think the discussion that we need to have in terms of what is the right ratio and a relationship that we have to have between property taxes for the local units of government and those taxes that the state has. And I think one of the things that I've been constantly hearing, and I'm not surprised you're hearing it too, from local units of government and from local businesses, is this continuing reliance on property taxes in general, and obviously the increase in property taxes the last few years. And it seems to me like, from what I'm hearing, continuing to relying on that and the increase is just unsustainable. And the question becomes then, from our point of view as policymakers, how do we take a look at that and give the right kind of support to local units of government in a way that's fair and that they can manage and they know that's predictable? I mean, one of the things that we hear a lot in our conversations around the state is citizens and Minnesotans don't like to have us in this crisis mode all the time where we're trying to solve a deficit. I mean, they're tired of us working to solve deficits. They want us to fix the roads and come up with new ideas and run government more effectively. And so the fact that we continue to engage in these deficit problems and not solve the long-term structural problem is a problem at the state level, but you're exactly right, Representative. It's definitely a problem on the local level, and those folks really are burdened because they often don't get the numbers until they've already set their budgets, which is a tough way to run local government. So I think one of the things that I certainly would love to talk to you more about and love to work with you on more is what is that right relationship and how can we provide serious and consistent funding for local governments and provide the necessary revenue at the state level. It's a tough challenge.
Okay.
Thank you.
Giffmeyer?
I think I was just going to do a follow-on, Mr. Chairman, because I also think we need to include then the relationship with local government aid, because it seems like we're kind of taking it and then giving it back. Maybe we could just quit taking it and giving it back and just have more of a straight-up, what are those functions? But I'll be glad to work on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Giffmeyer. And Commissioner Franz, thank you so much for your time. And like the governor said in the State of the State, I agree 100%. Our best ideas, the governor's best ideas, and we'll move this thing forward. So we'll see you in conference, if not before.
Thank you all very much.
I really appreciate it, and give the governor my regards, if you would, please, sir. Thank you, Commissioner. Now we will go back to members, the 821 amendment, and I have on my list Runbeck and Paymar. Representative Runbeck.
I'll pass, Mr. Chair.
Representative Paymar.
Mr. Chair, I just want to make sure I understand this. Was this Mr. Michael, maybe, or Representative Rukavina? So Section 12. So this is was this language that was adopted last year, that was sort of a prelude for the beginning processes of copper nickel mining on near the Boundary Waters canoe area? I just want to make sure that I have all of this clear about when this was adopted.
Mr. Chair.
It'll probably be Representative Rukavina.
Mr. Chair, first of all, I have to tell everybody after this discussion this morning that after 44 years, members, I am feeling finally good about myself, because when I was 16 and I got my driver's license, I was 103 pounds and 4'11", and I couldn't get a date, and I thought it was because of my size. But now I find out it's because I was driving a Dodge Dart with 3 on a tree. So I'm feeling wonderful right now, and I hope everybody votes for my amendment so I don't feel bad again. But anyway.
Well, Representative Rukavina, I always feel good about you. So, Representative Rukavina.
This language that's in here, with all the underlining dealing with non-ferrous mining, was in Representative David's bills last year, except I think the number was a little bit different on the occupation tax versus the net proceeds. But the chair did change the number for us last year. I can't remember what that number was. But other than that, everything in there. And then the language that's in current statute dealing with copper nickel mining, if it ever happens, has been in there for probably 15, 20 years, but it did not. It was supposed to reflect the distribution that's also currently going on with taconite iron ore taxes, but it never had the language to distribute some of those taxes, and it forgot about mines and plants, which, if PolyMet ever does get permitted, the plant is in a different taxing jurisdiction than the mine, and right now there's no way to address that. So that's what we're trying to clean up here, Representative Paymar.
Representative Paymar. Okay, to the 820.
Mr. Chair.
Representative Runbeck.
Sorry, I do remember my question now. So on the macro level, I've heard numbers, but I don't know if anyone's ever produced numbers. 800 million in taxes potentially off of if the non-ferrous mining becomes a real thing. And so I'm just curious what the shift would be if we're reducing to the state by 1% and increasing to the cities. What's at its best, what kind of a shift would that represent?
Mr. Chair and Representative Runbeck, I think you're tossing around a number that has to do with the royalties. Royalties have nothing to do with net proceeds or occupation taxes. Those are tied to world prices for the occupation tax. I believe Mr. Michaels can help me out here. For the iron ore, it's tied to the market price down on the lower Great Lakes steel mills. I don't know how it's tied to on copper nickel because we've never been there yet. But I have no idea, and I don't see anybody from the mining industry here to tell you annually what kind of occupation tax versus net proceeds tax would be generated. But the $800 million to $1 billion you're hearing about is just what the state, through the Permanent University Fund and the Permanent School Fund, think they have in royalties, which royalties 100%, other than what the DNR skims off, goes to those two funds and stays in the corpus. So that's, I think, the figure you're talking about.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I need another tutorial on
I will help.
iron range taxation.
Yes, I will.
Thank you.
Okay, Representative Rukavina moves the H2337A21 amendment. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? No. Motion prevails. I thank Representative Rukavina. Item next.
Mr. Chair?
Go to Representative Marquardt.
Mr. Chair, I would like to offer the A27 amendments, and I do have copies here.
Okay, if we could get that passed out while it's being passed out, if you could give us a description of what we're doing here. Representative Marquardt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. What this would do, it involves Article 2, Section 3 of the bill, and Article 2, Section 5 of the bill, dealing with the angel investment credit and also the net operating loss tax credit allocation. And what it would do, basically, is increase the angel investment credit between years 2011 to 2015 annually from $17 million to $20 million, and take that money and lower the net operating, basically, tax credits in 13-14 from $15 million to $12 million, and in 15 and 16 from $30 million to $27 million.
Okay, we should have the 827 amendment. Is there anyone? We don't have it yet. We won't vote on it until everybody has it. It's going to be read very quickly if we can get it passed out here.
We had a dog that didn't.
Representative Lincheski.
Well, I was going to wait till everyone has it. Mr. Chair, I actually like to move an amendment to it.
Okay,
and I have that as well.
Before we do that, while the amendment's being passed out, is there anyone in the audience who wishes to testify on behalf or with concerns on the A27 amendment?
Bobby's smiling.
Okay, Representative Lincheski.
Okay,
I think everybody has it now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have the DE3 amendment that I'd like to offer as an amendment, and I have it here for the pages.
Okay, if we could pass the DE3 amendment out.
I also have a couple of handouts that go with it.
Okay.
There's four things. Thank you.
Not off the press. Surprise attack. Oh, we're paying for it.
Okay, Representative Lincheski, would you please explain your amendment to the amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's a couple of things, just so people understand what I'm trying to do here. One is the spreadsheet that goes with the amendment. I'm looking at it now. It actually says the DE2. It goes with the DE3. If that's, I don't know if people have the spreadsheet yet. That's one of the handouts.
So, Representative Lincheski, the spreadsheet will say DE2,
Yeah, it
but it
looks
should
like
be
this.
DE3.
Right, and that's because when we were sitting in the room, we found a drafting error, so staff has gone and redrafted the amendment. So the DE2 spreadsheet actually goes with the DE3 amendment, if you want to try to follow. And then there's a couple newspaper articles that got handed out with it. And then finally, Mr. Chair, before I try to explain it, I think the best way for members to think about what's going on in the DE3 is to look at your own spreadsheet, or your bill, Mr. Chair, and the majority's bill, and versus the new spreadsheet that I'm offering now. And I think it will become clear to you what's going on in the bill. So Mr. Chair, what the DE3 is doing is...
Councilor Lancheski, I don't think we have the spreadsheet.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And just procedurally, is the DE3 being moved as an amendment to the bill or as an amendment to the A27 amendment? And if it's being offered to the A27 amendment, how does it work? I'm looking at lines 1.1, 1.2, 1. It doesn't work because that's written to the DE1 amendment.
Mr. Chair?
Representative Lancheski?
Mr. Chair, this is the issue I raised at the beginning of the committee, that our amendments would not work, and you said you'd take them.
Representative Lancheski, we said they wouldn't work if I put my amendment on.
Well,
we didn't put my amendment on.
I'm happy to withdraw it and have the staff redraft them all. That's fine.
There must be a better way here to do this. Mr. Michael, what would it take to...
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Representative
Could we get a recess to do that then? Because, the staff's going to have to go upstairs.
No, we're not going to recess now. Mr. Michael, what would be the best way to handle this?
Mr. Chairman, I mean, the amendment, the DE3 amendment is just drafted as an amendment to the delete everything amendment that was drafted by the committee. In order to make that an amendment to the Marquardt amendment, I suppose you could just restyle it as an amendment to the Marquardt amendment that deletes, everything after line 1.2 and inserts the Lancheski amendment after 1.3.
Okay, so on the DE3 amendment, you can't amend an amendment to an amendment. So...
But it's a bill.
Doesn't work.
It's been adopted, right? Chair?
Let them figure it out. Consider recess. No, it's their problem. They'll have to read it out. They're going to figure it out.
Well, okay, Mr. Michael, what would we need to do do we just need to on line 1.2 remove H2337 DE1 and insert,
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I think if you would insert moves to amend the Marquardt amendment. So rather than reading the way it reads now, it would say moves to amend the Marquardt amendment, parens H2337A27, close parens, as follows. And then on 1.3, delete lines 1.3 to 1.5 and insert.
would there be any objection to doing that? I know technically we're not supposed to. Representative Biskins?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I can't speak for every member of this committee, but I understand the procedure and the process is so that Representative Winchesky doesn't want people to amend her amendment. I get that, all right? So, Representative Winchesky, I, for one, will vote straight up and down on your amendment if we just do it in the normal process rather than this cerebral gymnastics we have to try and go through to get this to structurally fit and find out afterwards, of course, that it was illegally adopted or whatever. We can vote up and down on your amendment.
Representative Lancheski.
Mr. Chair, I'll withdraw the amendment, and we're going to work to redraft it.
Okay, so we have the 827 amendment before us. Representative Gavel? Okay. Okay, we have the 827 amendment. Discussion on the 827 amendment.
Well,
Representative
I think you
Lynchesky?
need to consult.
Representative
Chair?
Markman?
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. The problem we're having, because everything changed when we walked in the room, is we're trying to talk to the...
Representative Lynchesky, we didn't change anything. The bill before us now is the bill that was before us, other than two amendments from Representative Rukavina.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, we're trying to work with the nonpartisan staff while we're in committee. So, it just, we'll keep going here, but it's just going to add time later tonight. So, that's all. What it's worth.
Yeah.
See, you're all taken care of because you're reading the right, so.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, go ahead.
President Lynchesky? Representative Hartman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a procedural question. So the DE1 amendment that we talked about, was that yesterday?
Yes.
We did not adopt that.
Yes, we did.
We did.
Yes, we did.
So I'm not understanding then what the problem is, because Representative Marquardt's amendment amends the DE1, which was adopted.
Right.
And then Representative Lynchesky's amendment amends the Marquardt amendment. So we're not on a third-degree amendment.
No, it doesn't. It amends the DE1 amendment.
Right, but I thought Joel Michaels just gave us language that would change the Lynchesky amendment to be amending the Marquardt amendment.
Okay. Any other questions?
Maybe, I don't know if Joel Michael can
Mr. Michael?
explain to me what's going on, because I'm not completely tracking it.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Hortman, yes, I think if you essentially just restyle the introductory portion of the Lynchesky amendment so that it is drafted as, instead of deleting everything after the enacting clause of the bill, it would delete lines 3 through 5 of the Marquardt amendment and insert the contents of the rest of the contents of the Lynchesky amendment. It would have that effect of essentially, I'm not a parliamentarian, but that, you could argue that that's a substitute amendment, I guess. But essentially what it would do is delete lines 3 through 5 of the Marquardt amendment and insert the Lynchesky amendment.
Well, let me ask, Mr. Chair,
Representative Hartman.
Mr. Michael, would it be possible to insert the Lynchesky language after line 1.5? I mean, because...
Mr. Michael?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Hortman, the difficulty with doing that is that the lines 3 through 5 are amending portions of the amendment that the Lynchesky amendment is deleting.
Now I think I'm caught up. Thank you.
Members, would there be, we have some precedents here on this, because in the past we've taken full bills and just gone ahead and done this. Would there be objection to just, I know we can't amend an amendment, but just understanding that the amendment is as is, but it's to the 827 amendment? Would there be objection from committee members to do that? We've done that before on full bills. We've taken full bills and taken them in and done this. What would the preference? I'm not going to go forward if anyone's objecting to being able to do that. Representative Anderson?
Well, Mr. Chair, why doesn't she just offer it as is and not attach it to the Marquardt one? We'll vote on the Marquardt one, then we'll vote on hers. What's the diff?
Representative Lynchesky?
Mr. Chair, I think Representative Biskins explained the difference. And it makes it not divisible. I mean...
So the other question would be from...
That's not my... I mean, we can't set a precedence of doing this. That is not appropriate. It is not appropriate, Mr. Chair, for us to not just offer this amendment as is.
Commissioner Lancheski?
Mr. Chair, I'm not looking for direction from the majority on how to do this, so you don't need to offer your suggestions, but I've withdrawn the amendment, Mr. Chair, my amendment. I think you understand, Mr. Chair, what I'm attempting to do.
I know exactly what's going on.
Yes, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. And, Mr. Chair, we will redraft the amendments. Okay? So, I think you understand the situation we're in.
Right. I was born on a day, but it wasn't yesterday.
Yes, and Mr. Chair, I just will add, you're right, and I appreciate that has been the history in this committee for a long time, that people can offer a bill as you can do an amendment that is a bill. Correct. This, however, is not an introduced bill.
Right. Right. And the tax committee has been very flexible in that regard in the past. So, members, what would you prefer to do? Well, you withdrew the amendment. Okay, we'll take the 827 amendment. Discussion to the 827 amendment. Person Markwart? Person Markwart?
Mr. Chair, I would like to withdraw the 827 amendment at this time.
827 amendment withdrawn. The next amendment, Person Loeffler?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I have an A11 amendment.
Okay, if the amendment could be passed out, please.
This is your spreadsheet.
Okay, members, the A11 amendment, Representative Loeffler, could you please describe your amendment?
I could, Mr. Chair. This one actually came out of the bipartisan Small Business Caucus, co-chaired by Representative Downey and Representative Dietrich. And they started meeting before the session even began and identified small business taxes or property taxes as a major obstacle to small businesses within our state. And had a work group, looked at a variety of different ways to deal with that, and decided that what we really ought to do is use the statewide levy, property tax levy, as the way to make an adjustment for our smallest businesses. And this does not have a fiscal cost to it. It doesn't have long tails. What it does is it says that the first $150,000 of value would be exempt from the commercial industrial state levy. It separates out the seasonal rec as a separate category, as your underlying bill does, and then just adjust for that within the commercial industrial part of the statewide levy. It will have a significant impact on small businesses, with the largest benefit, of course, being those under $150,000 in value, which will be benefited by about $1,100, I believe is the figure, and will have a sliding fee benefit to small businesses up to $1 million or slightly over $1 million in value, and it will do so by shifting within that statewide levy. But what was interesting was when we had Mr. Hines do the runs, the impact in total property taxes on the largest businesses, which are the smallest part of our statewide CY base, and definitely in almost any type of community, including Hennepin County, the impact on them would be about 2.75%, so 2 3/4% increase in order to give real property tax relief to our smallest businesses throughout the state. And if you look at the property tax tables that we've had in the past, you're going to see that the small businesses actually had much more significant property tax increases just even in the last year with what passed last year than the big tax bigger businesses with, $2 million of value. And so they're the more needy of this group. And they also are much more subject to our local economy. Most of them aren't global competitors. They don't get to offset downturns in our local economy with business in Australia or Asia or Europe or those sorts of things. They tend to be our real Minnesota-grown businesses. And so the Small Business Caucus felt like this was a fair way to deal with a real problem with our small businesses all throughout the state. The way it's drafted, it has no tails, it has no budget impacts, it's all internally handled. And we did have the Small Business Caucus is, I think, 20 to 30 people. And we did vote on 11 different legislative proposals on a bipartisan basis, and this was one of those that the group decided should go forward.
Questions?
A long explanation for a short amendment.
Okay. We have the A11 amendment. Are there folks, I'll go to questions from members, but are there folks in the audience who wish to testify regarding this? Mr. Hesse, if you want to come here, down here, but first we'll go to Representative Downey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The reference being made to the Small Business Caucus, I thought I'd chime in, and I'm going to regrettably vote against Representative Loeffler's amendment. I think the way that the chair has structured an overall entire elimination of the commercial and industrial property tax over time and the small business relief that you have structured, maybe not as comprehensively or as in large a measure as Representative Loeffler would kind of in the immediate term. For the long term, I think the way you've structured this is far preferable. So I'm going to urge support of the chair's bill and a no vote on this amendment.
Other discussion for members? Okay, we'll go to Mr. Hesse and then back to the author. Mr. Hesse, please state your name, who represents for the record, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tom Hesse with the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce. We would also urge you to oppose the amendment for a couple of reasons. First, it deletes Section 1 of the Delete All Amendment, which is obviously the major property tax relief and the phase out of the statewide property tax that's contained in the bill. But also, for a second reason, if all you do is exempt the first $150,000 from the statewide property tax, that will cause shifting onto different types of property and will really create an inequity within the business property tax system. For example, if you're a small business that happens to be located in a multi-tenant facility, you really don't receive any relief and actually get some burden shifted onto you because of this system. So again, I just would urge you to oppose the amendment. Thank you.
Any other testimony from members of the audience? Okay, wrap it up, Representative Loeffler.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And sorry, I was just kind of wasn't planning to take this amendment as quick as I did. So I just wanted to find the data that I had hoped to share. And that's, I think, that you need to know that from 2011 to 2012, our low-value CI properties were experienced an increase of 6.8%. 6.8%. And when I talk to my small businesses, you know, this is the major thing that they're worried about in terms of the costs that we can control in their businesses. The high-valued commercial industrial statewide only had a 3.4% increase. So the small businesses have already been hit with double the increase in 1 year of the large ones. The impact of this on the large ones is just an increase of an average 2.75% increase. So it doesn't even make up that difference that was imposed between these two different types of businesses in the actions that were taken last year. And I think it's really important for people to realize that. The budget that we passed last year resulted in almost exactly twice, on a statewide basis, twice the property tax increase on small businesses versus the high-value businesses. This will provide property tax relief to those small businesses across the board with not even making up that difference on the highest value businesses in our communities. And with that, Mr. Chair, I would ask for a roll call vote.
Roll call. Haven't been requested. Any other discussion? Representative Downey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, Representative Loeffler, I appreciate your focusing this very much on the smallest of our small businesses, and I know we share that interest. I just want to point out to members that we are not only, in addition, in the chair's bill, in addition to actually eliminating the property tax, statewide property tax altogether over time, there is still a 70%, I believe, on the first $100,000 of value So we have a pretty significant targeting of small business tax relief in here as well, and then on top of that, get the added value of eliminating it entirely over time. So while Representative Loeffler's bill would make that more substantial for small businesses in the immediate term, I think the overall relief that's provided in the chair's bill is preferable.
Okay. The Representative Loon?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. We have a roll call.
Okay, we have a roll call. The committee legislative assistant will take the roll.
Chair Davids?
No.
Representative Loon?
No.
No, but who's
Representative Lincheski?
Yes.
Representative Anderson?
No.
Representative Bills? Representative Bills is excused. Representative Biskins?
No.
Representative Carlson?
Aye.
Representative Crawford? Representative Crawford is excused. Representative Dabney? Representative Dabney is excused. Representative Depke? No. Representative Downey?
No.
Representative Drazkowski?
No.
Representative Erickson? No. Representative Garofalo? No. Representative Gottwalt?
No.
Representative Hortman?
Aye.
Representative Kiffmeyer?
No.
Representative Knuth? Representative Knuth is excused. Representative Coonan?
Yes.
Representative Lesh?
Yes.
Representative Loeffler?
Yes.
Representative Mack?
No.
Representative Marquardt?
Yes.
Representative Myra?
No.
Representative Paymar?
Yes.
Representative Rukavina?
Yep.
Representative Runbeck?
No.
Representative Tilbury?
Yes.
Representative Wardlow?
No.
There being 15 noes and 10 ayes, the A11 amendment is not adopted. Okay, members, what we're going to do in a second here is we're going to go into a recess until 12:45, and hopefully we can get the amendments we need in the order we need them. By that time, we will continue to take amendments until we get the bill wrapped up here. So with that, 12:45, but we need to be back here 12:45. There'll be a Republican members caucus in my office immediately after we go into recess. Representative Lincheski.
Mr. Chair, we've had some staff working with the nonpartisan staff, and we now understand a number of our amendments are in order.
Okay.
The one I was on was not, so we are prepared to go to future amendments if we're ready to go.
You're out of order? or your amendment, I'm sorry, excuse me.
So if you were waiting on us, we're good to go.
Okay. No, we were going to, I want everybody to have some lunch so they can have something to eat, have some more donuts, a little more coffee, and so at 12:45, but please be back here at 12:45 and we'll get back to amendments. We are in recess.
The only thing I concur with him